Well, hey guys, good to have you here today as we begin a brand new series we're calling Reconstructing Faith. And in this series, we're going to be looking at Jesus, like just Jesus himself, as our foundation of understanding and perhaps redefining what our faith means to us in this modern world that we live in. This series is really an investigation into a couple of things: who Jesus is, what he told us about God, and what he actually told us to do. Or what we're going to do is peel back the layers of tradition, right, and interpretation and an assumption to get to the heart of Jesus' message. And my hope as we go through the series is that we rediscover Jesus in a way that challenges us, comforts us, and compels us to live out his teachings in our everyday life. So let me begin with a question here. And that question is, what's required to be a Christian? What's required to be a Christian? In other words, what do I have to believe? Right? What is the things that I have to do? Is there anything that I have to stop doing? Is there anything I have to start doing? And depending on your church background, you might have some different ideas about all of these things that we're doing. And it might be hard to determine what is essential things, like what's essential to following Jesus, because every denomination, every movement, and sometimes even individual churches seem to add their own set of things that are essential to being a Christian, right? They have their own set of traditions. If you grew up in church, you know this, right? They have their own expectations on how you behave. They have their own expectations on how you worship. And in some cases, they may even have their own translations of the Bible and their own interpretations of their translations of the Bible. So, the question is, what's actually required, right? What is actually indispensable, necessary, and crucial to being a Christian, to being a faithful follower of Jesus? But maybe even equally as important is what's not. Like what's peripheral or what's just cultural. You know, that's just the way we do it in our culture. And before long, we think, well, those things are now essential. Or what's comfortable, right? This is how our church has always done it, but that's not necessarily essential. Or what's fashionable, right? What's trendy? This is trendy church, and so this is trendy church. This is the way to be a Christian. Or what's traditional, right? And if you leave traditional, well, maybe somehow you're leaving what's actually true and leaving the actual faith. And believe it or not, this is nothing new, right? This type of thing has been going on since the church began over 2,000 years ago. In every generation, new, novel, sometimes toxic, sometimes cruel, sometimes divisive, even dangerous teachings and opinions, they can get woven into certain streams of Christianity. And these new, novel ideas, they get often elevated to the status of doctrine or dogma, right? This is what you have to do. And then they get woven into theology. This is what we say God says, and this is what God is like. And before we know it, these new non-essential things, they become essential. And when you begin to question, or in some cases, out and out reject some of these non-essentials, people in your faith movement, they might consider you maybe like a lesser Christian or an unfaithful church person. But when we return to the Gospels and we look at Jesus' life, his actions, and his priorities, it becomes evident that many of these issues are, in fact, just add-ons. And what's worse is that maybe some of the things that actually are essential to following Jesus, they end up being completely ignored. And the true essence of Christianity, they can get overshadowed by debates and online arguments over non-essentials, leading to division, rather than to the unity that we are called to in our faith in Jesus. And this is the epidemic the church is facing today. Every day I wake up and I read more and more stories. I encounter more and more people, Christians, who are finding themselves kind of at a crossroads. And they're feeling compelled to leave their churches because of some bad teachings that they have, or they thought that this is completely out of step, and probably rightfully so, completely out of step with their understanding of Jesus' message. Or maybe it was multiple encounters with legalism or judgment or hypocrisy. Some people are leaving the church because maybe some harmful advice that they were given or actions that were taken. And I know this because I have conversations with people, and they say things like, I'm just not even sure that Jesus would act that way. I'm not sure that Jesus would support that view or he would support that stance. And so they feel with no other options, they have no choice but to leave their church. And a decision to leave a church, especially when it's your only church you've ever grown up in, and it's the only version of Christianity that you know, it can lead to leaving Christianity altogether. And in the effort to escape some sort of harmful views or escape things that seem out of step with Jesus, what you leave behind are the good things, the things that are meaningful and life-giving. I was sitting and recalling how many conversations I've had with someone just this year around this idea of I've got questions and I'm not sure and I feel like I need to leave the church. I've had about 17, to my recollection, 17 conversations with individuals, stories of people who have left the church because of some rejection, ultimately of what I found out is just an add-on, a non-essential. That's why I'm doing this series. I want us to understand what is essential. Stories of people who have had a profound sense of betrayal or have been let down by their faith. And almost every one of these conversations, there is this version of this question that comes up. Is there any value to being a Christian? Is there any value to being a Christian? In other words, does Christianity, if you strip away all of the add-ons, all of the denominational and institutional baggage, all that non-essential stuff, does it offer anything valuable and important? And my answer to that is a resounding yes, but you have to strip away the baggage. You have to strip away the non-essentials to getting there. It requires us to get back to the basics of what it is that Jesus teaches, who he really is, and what do we do with that message. So that's what we're going to do in this series. We're going to go back to Jesus. And quite honestly, what we're going to do over the next 12 months is every series, just to telegraph something to you, every series that we do for the next 12 months is all about Jesus. We want you to be really clear about who Jesus is. And if you've been in church for a while, this going back and trying to figure out what's essential and not essential, it's not as easy as it sounds. It sounds like, well, we can just figure that out, but it can be pretty difficult because you have grown up and your faith has grown up with a certain way of thinking about God. All of us here, especially if you grew up like I did and you grew up in a church, we have a list of things that are essential for faith. And we put those things in, let's just call it our God box. And inside of our God box is kind of our operating manual for God. This is how God operates. This is how faith works. And this is how God thinks. This is how God acts. And because you have that in your God box, you feel like, I can't question what's in my God box, right? Because a faith that can't be questioned can't be trusted. This is why it's important. If you feel like you can't question what's in your God box, I'm here to tell you, that's a kind of faith that can't be trusted because it can't stand the test of time. It's like, oh, it can't hold up to a couple of questions. That's there. A faith that can't be questioned can't be trusted. And this is important because all of us have questions. Maybe you want to talk about it. Maybe you don't want to talk about it. But a faith that can't handle questions. Like if God can't handle your question, you need a bigger God. Like he can handle any question that you want to throw at him. And I understand that in a lot of faith circles, asking these big, scary questions can get you in a lot of trouble. It can get you gossiped about. It can get people looking side-eyed at you. In some faith, you can get you kicked out. Like you can't answer those questions. You need to leave. So if you're in one of those environments, or you have a friend that's in one of those environments, or you have a family that's in one of those environments, they feel like their only option is to leave. And what I want to say in this series is, you do not have to leave Jesus. You do not have to leave the church. There is a faith that can make a difference in your life, but it's crucial that your faith grows up. Many people leave faith because their faith hasn't grown up. Karen Armstrong has written a lot of books around comparative religion. She is a British person. In her younger days, she grew up in the Roman Catholic Church, and she actually spent time in a convent as a nun. kind of had a bad experience with the church, kind of walked away from what would be considered organized religion. But she's written a lot of great books on comparative religion. And she wrote this statement in The Case for God, and I'd love to read it to you here. She says, "Many of us have been stranded with an incoherent concept of God. We learned about God at about the same time we were told about Santa Claus. But while our understanding of the Santa Claus phenomena evolved and matured, our theology remained somewhat infantile." And as I was reading that, what I was thinking is, when it comes to faith, we have to leave room for those larger questions. Our faith has to grow up. We have to be able to talk about the things inside of us that cause us to question God or to question faith. And at the same time, I also know I will not get answers to all of my questions. And I've reached an age now where I'm kind of comfortable with that. Like understanding I've got a lot of questions, we're not going to get answers to those. I'm okay with that. I've got more questions now. Last week I talked about my faith crisis I went through in 2007. I've got more questions now, I think, than I had back then, but I'm okay understanding I'm not going to get answers. A couple of weeks ago, we baptized a guy named Jeremy, and Doug was saying one of the things that he says, and I love this statement, he says, "Look, I've just finally figured out I'm okay with not having all my questions answered. But what I'm not okay with is not being able to ask those questions. Like, I'm not okay with not being able to think about those things and having those discussions with people, because that is how your faith grows up. And it's vitally important that our faith grows up, because a faith that's not allowed to grow up will be deconstructed intentionally or eventually. A faith that is not allowed to grow up will be deconstructed intentionally or eventually. If it's not given the room to mature, to consider kind of the broader context of the world that we live in and the things that we are facing today, this unraveling will happen. And it may happen because someone chooses to step back from faith. I talk with people all the time that that's the case. Or it might fall apart. Or it might fall apart because the faith that you had is still back in kids' church. And it's a childlike faith that can't answer adult questions or the complexities and hardships of adult life. In other words, if we don't actively expand or challenge our beliefs, the harsh realities of life will do it for us. Like, imagine this. Imagine always being told that you are David, and everything that is coming against you is Goliath, and David always beats Goliath, right? That's a story that we heard in kids' church. That's a great story. It's an amazing story. But imagine you're an adult now, and Goliath has won. And Goliath keeps winning. Goliath has won for the last month. Goliath has won for the last year. Goliath has won for the last decade. And every problem that you keep facing, that Goliath of fears and financial problems and relationship problems, Goliath keeps winning. What do you do with that? Right? You start to think, am I doing something wrong? And when your personal stories don't seem to fit the biblical narratives that you've been taught, it can leave you feeling like you're drowning, questioning why your reality doesn't match the stories that you've been told. Now, if any of that resonates with you or resonates with someone close to your life, I've got really good news for you. Go read the Gospels. Go read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, because Jesus consistently sought out and engaged with people who were just like you. He sought out and engaged with people that the religious system wasn't working for them, that they felt like they were on the outside. He didn't just wait for them to come. He actively went after them, people who were disillusioned by what was going on. So if you're feeling disconnected from your faith traditions or questioning the faith structure that you grew up in, you're not alone, and Jesus is with you. And your maturity and willingness to ask tough questions, even stepping back maybe to ask those questions, is a sign of deep faith, not a lack of faith. It's a sign that you're trying to figure things out. You might have to take a step back, but your openness to stay engaged and to keep asking those questions is a sign of mature faith. So, with the time we got remaining, what I want to look at here is one of the core, if not the core topic, if I go back to my question, of what is essential to being a Christian. This is something you need to wrestle with because this is the topic. This is the thing, and it's the question that I asked you last week at Easter. And so we're going to go back, and we're going to revisit this, and we're going to look at this even in more depth today. And the question is, who is Jesus? This you have to wrestle to the ground. Now, as we begin to ask ourselves this question, who is Jesus, I want you to use your imagination for me. Okay, I want us to step back in time. I want you to imagine yourself that you're in AD 30. All right, long time ago. And in AD 30, there's no concept of church as we know it. Right? There weren't gathering in places like this and people standing on stages. We didn't have leather-bound Bibles sitting on shelves. There were no Christian songs and worship songs filling the air. There were no bands. There was no youth group. No Christian theology to study. The religious landscape that existed in AD 30 was dominated by the Torah, by the temple, by the leadership of the priests, and by the domination and being ruled over of the Roman Empire. And amidst this backdrop, I want you to put yourself in a place where you're hearing these stories about an unconventional rabbi from Nazareth. He seems to be causing quite a stir, right? He's attracting huge crowds. He's telling these parables and these stories that are enlightening. At the same time, they are perplexing. They are challenging the status quo. He's openly criticizing the corruption that is so prominent inside of the temple system and amongst the priests themselves. And this Rabbi Jesus, he's a figure of controversy. There are people that love him, and there are people that hate him, and there are people that are just bewildered and confused by his teachings. So in that setting, I want you to picture yourself in this moment listening to a conversation that Jesus is having with his closest disciples. It's about 2.5 years into his ministry. They've been with him for about 2.5 years, and they are just outside of a city called Caesarea Philippi. And against that backdrop, as far as you could get from the religious system of Jerusalem, this is a Roman-occupied city, Jesus has a conversation that is so critical to our faith, you can't just skip over it. It gets to the heart of what it means to follow him and the question, and it echoes through the ages. So Matthew chapter 16, if you got a Bible or the Bible app, we're going to go there. Jesus is going to have this conversation with his disciples. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, again, this is a Roman city named after Caesar and after one of Herod's brothers, Philip, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" Who do people say that the Son of Man is? Now, this title here, Son of Man, is one that Jesus takes for himself. It actually comes from Daniel, where the prophet Daniel lays out that there is someone called the Son of Man who has divine authority to rule. They are destined to judge all of the nations. So Jesus is saying, he's identifying, I am that guy, which is an audacious claim to make, unless it's true. So verse 13, Jesus asks this question. Verse 14, the disciples begin to answer him. Well, they replied, some say John the Baptist. Some say Elijah. Others say Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. It's clear as the disciples are talking about this that people see Jesus as a figure of significant spiritual power. These are spiritual greats in their world, yet they are struggling to fully identify or understand his identity. So he listens to what others are saying, and then Jesus does what Jesus is really good at. He's like, enough talking about them. Now I want to talk about you. Then he asked them, okay, this is what all the people said. But who do you say I am? It's great what other people are saying, you know. They're wrong, but it's kind of nice to hear I don't want to hear what they have to say. Who do you say? And all of a sudden it becomes very clear this is not a casual conversation. This is something deeper that is going on. And in this statement that's coming is the foundation of everything that follows in the Christian faith. And so Peter, one of the followers, who's a bit of a hothead and he's quick to react to everything, he's the first one that speaks up. Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And that is a declaration that changes everything. This marks a turning point in the understanding of Jesus' identity and his mission. This moment gives a profound revelation about the nature of who Jesus is and the essence of Christian faith. Peter tells us, you're not just a wise teacher. You're not just a prophetic figure. You are the Messiah, the one through whom God will accomplish something entirely new in the world. You are a world changer. And when he names Jesus Messiah, this term Messiah is a deeply rooted belief inside of their system. There is an expectation that Messiah is a coming deliverer, anointed by God for a special purpose, to be king and ruler of everything. Peter's statement, he is recognizing Jesus as the ultimate king, not just of a nation, but all of humanity. He's declaring that Jesus is the very Son of God. Now just think with me for a moment. Consider the gravity of this acknowledgement. Jesus is saying, standing right in front of me is someone who embodies God himself and is bringing his kingdom to earth. That God has chosen this man to manifest his kingship in a tangible, walkable, relatable way. This isn't about some temporary earthly kingdom. It's about the eternal breaking into the present through this man who's standing right here in front of me. And regardless of your faith system, regardless if you're a Christian or not, I want you to just think for a moment. What if this is who Jesus really is? What if he is indeed the divine king and representative? I'm not asking you to believe it just yet. But what if this is true? Because if he is, his presence on earth changes everything. If this is true, then it's not enough just to recognize him as some historical figure or as some profound teacher. If Jesus is who Peter claims him to be, he is the axis on which our entire understanding of life and purpose and eternity, he is the axis on which it rotates. Jesus becomes not just one reference point among many, he becomes the reference point. If what Peter says is true, then there's only one response. And that is, whatever you say, Jesus, my answer is yes. Because he is king, king of all. He is everything. Acknowledging who Jesus is and getting that right is critical. Now, look how Jesus responds to Peter. So Peter makes this audacious claim. I mean, this is huge. You are the Son of God. Jesus replied, "You are blessed, Simon, son of John, because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. You did not learn this from any human being." I want you to notice, Jesus doesn't diminish the moment. Peter says, "You are the Son of God." And Jesus doesn't go, whoa, 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 Peter, that's a little too far. Like you've taken it a little too far here. Let's dial it back. No, he doesn't. He doesn't. He actually says, you got it right. Right? You are blessed for having this, but he says, but this doesn't come to you through human wisdom. For those of us who are followers of Jesus and this understanding, and maybe you're considering being a Jesus follower, the same is true for you. You don't come to this revelation through human wisdom. Recognizing Jesus' identity isn't about intellectual achievement. It's not because you've studied it and this is what it is. It's about a spiritual revelation. It is something that God will reveal to you. And when you have that moment, you just know that is true. I just know this is what it is. So when Jesus gives Peter this nod of approval, he's saying his insight is because God gave it to you. If you're a follower of Jesus, the reason you're a follower of Jesus is because God did something inside of you and you said, yes, this is who Jesus is. It's like a switch gets flipped inside of you. And this whole faith thing, it's not like ticking off boxes or just following rules. And maybe you grew up in a culture, that's what it was, and I got to do this, and I got to do this. It's not about that. It's about having this vision that goes past what's right in front of our eyes, that sees beyond what is obvious and sees who Jesus is. It sees into the reality of who he is, that he is the ultimate ruler of everything, the one who's at the very heart of everything that we see and everything that we do. Imagine faith as a journey where you're not just looking at Jesus as some sort of historical figure that needs to be studied, but you're seeing him as the main character in the story of life. It's as if Jesus is saying, hey, seeing me as Lord and King isn't about just believing I existed or that I did some cool stuff back then. It's about understanding that I'm active and central to everything now. I don't know how many of you are into games and gaming. Where are our students at? You got any gamers in here? Okay. Got any adults that are into gaming? I am. Yeah. Here's how I would say this if you're into gaming. Jesus isn't just some random NPC that you encounter who gives you side quests. Jesus is the game developer, the game designer who built the whole thing, and he is playing alongside of you and telling you how the whole thing works. That is who Jesus is. Jesus isn't just a part of life, he is the point of life. It's realizing that everything from the mundane stuff, like what you're having for breakfast, to the big life questions of purpose and destiny, all of it orbits around him. So when Peter makes this statement and Jesus says, yeah, you got it right, it is a big deal. It's like Jesus is saying, hey, Peter, you get it. You are not just following me because I'm a good teacher. You're not just following me because you think I'm going to overthrow the Romans. You are following me because now you see the bigger picture, that I'm here to shake things up, that I'm here to take what is not known and to make it known. I'm here to redefine what life and power and kingship really mean. So this isn't about Peter coming up with some super intellectual reason. This is about something being revealed to him because he was open to a truth bigger than what he saw in front of him. And that is the kind of faith journey that Jesus invites us all on, where we see him not just as a historical figure, but Lord and King, the central force of existence. So, let me ask you again. What if everything that I have just said is true? What if it's true? I believe it's true. You may not believe it's true. But what if it is? How should we act? We should probably act the way they acted. They believed. And the good news for us is, not only did they believe, they also had another moment where they didn't believe. So like right now, they're all in. We're all in with you, Jesus. And in just a few short months, they're all out again. Like they have a moment where their faith gets shaken. They all have second thoughts. And every single one of them walk away. Why? Well, turns out they had their own little God box. Just like you have a God box, they had a God box. You know, that mental container where we shove all our ideas about how God should act and what God should do. Well, in their God box, God always wins. Or they always win, I should say. They always win because God is on our side. And in their God box, there's no way that the Son of God could die, right? because that's not what God does. But then Jesus ends up on a cross. And suddenly their God box doesn't make any sense. Their Messiah, their ultimate king in their eyes, well, he lost. That wasn't part of their plan. So they bail, and they take their God box with them, and they unfollow Jesus because the story didn't match their expectations. But just as we taught last week, when Jesus rose from the dead, everything changed. In that moment, they realized, wow, our God box is way too tiny. In our God box, we have some things that are wrong. In our God box, there were some assumptions we had that just weren't right. We had some things that were stuck in tradition, that weren't even close to what God was really doing. And so now with this new, unboxed version of God, they go out and they change the world because of their new understanding. And that is why you and I are here sitting in a church today. It's because they allowed their faith to be unboxed. The resurrection of Jesus becomes the cornerstone that shapes and defines everything in Christianity. It's the reason that I get up every morning and I feel compelled to open my Bible and begin to read the words of Jesus or read the words of those that were closest to him. Because where else would I want to start my day? What's more crucial, what's more life-altering than turning to the words of God's chosen King? And I get it, in the midst of our busy day and all the things that are competing for our attention, dedicating time to listening to Jesus is hard, but it's not just beneficial. It is essential. It isn't just another item on the to-do list. It is tapping into the thing that Peter was able to tap into, a source of knowing that is beyond seeing what is right in front of us. And while as Christians and churches, we might bicker about the nitty-gritty of church life or some theological fine point, which I love talking about those things, but as long as we realize they're not the point. At the end of the day, there is one agreement that puts everything into perspective. There is one agreement that is one chord that no matter how out of tune we get with each other, this one chord brings us back to Jesus. Who is Jesus? Jesus is God's Son and our King. Understanding that Jesus is God's Son and our King is the absolute starting point of following him. And maybe you need to take a moment and really let that sink in. Like, Jesus is exactly who he said he was. He is God's Son and our King. His early followers understood that. They got it. Then they doubted, right? Because, hello, messiahs aren't supposed to die. But when Jesus resurrected from the dead, they were all in again. They realized, yep, this guy is the real deal. He is God's Son, God's chosen ruler. Now, for us, what do we do with this? I mean, if Jesus really is who he claims to be, what's our move? Like, if this really is true, if he's God's Son and our King, what choice do we have but to go all in, to surrender, to worship, to just say yes to whatever he's asking? Right? It's not about having a debate. It's about seeing the ultimate act of love, God sending his Son for us to cover a debt we could never handle on our own. And if that doesn't make you want to stop everything and just follow, I don't know what will. Because here's the thing. If Jesus is God's King, and he's out here loving us, rooting for us, and has literally laid everything on the line for us, our response should write itself. We bow down. Not in a you're the boss way, but in a my heart is yours way. Like, I'm about to surrender, yes, but it's the kind of surrender that feels like freedom. It's choosing to follow him because in the grand scheme, that's the only move that makes the difference. And so, as we start reconstructing our faith, accepting and submitting to Jesus as the King is the foundation. Because if you get this part solid, you'll be golden. Everything we do, everything we believe, it all spirals from this core truth. If you're clear on Jesus being the Son of God and our King, you're on the right track. All the other stuff, there's still plenty of important stuff out there, and we'll dive into some of those things over the next couple of weeks. But remember, getting this core truth locked down is what sets the stage for everything else. It's like the main melody in a complex piece of music. You get the melody right, and all the harmonies just fall into place. Hey, let's pray together. Heavenly Father, we're standing at a crossroads here. And we think about Jesus and who he is, that he's your Son and our King. And if we take this truth to heart, it seems like our next steps are pretty clear. Our only real option is to dive in head first, to say yes to whatever you're asking us, to surrender fully, to worship deeply, and to follow wherever he leads. So here we are, choosing to bow down, not out of some sort of obligation, not because it's something that we're supposed to do, but because our hearts are wholly yours. This surrender is not much about as much about us giving up as it is us about gaining everything. We're not just saying you're the boss. We're saying our hearts completely belong to you, completely. This kind of surrender is the kind of thing that brings freedom, that shows us the way to truly live. Following Jesus, going all in, that's what makes the difference in our lives. So God, help us to live this out. To be people who not just say we believe, but be people who live like we do. People who follow Jesus with everything we are because we know it's the best, most life-giving move we can make. Father, thanks for being patient with us and for loving us and for leading us closer to you every single day. In Jesus' name, we pray. Amen. Well, hey friends, thanks for joining us today. If you think today's message might be valuable to someone you know, would you mind sharing this video? Not only could it be helpful for them, but by sharing this content as well as liking and subscribing to this channel, you're helping us accomplish our mission to raise the reputation of Jesus. And along those lines, each and every week, I ask, could you help us out financially by heading over to our website at nextlevelchurch.org. Click the green give button and choose one of the giving options that's there. It's your faithful financial support that helps us create content like this and continues to raise the reputation of Jesus where we live, work, and play. Now, by way of benediction, let me reread to you Matthew 16:16, where Simon Peter says, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." May you walk confidently in the light of this revelation, and may you allow it to shape your every action and decision with courage and grace. Hey guys, have a blessed week. We'll see you back next week as we continue on our series, Reconstructing Faith.